There is a weight most people carry that has no physical form. It does not press on the body, it presses on the mind. It is the weight of attachment. You feel it when you check your phone compulsively, looking for a message that might never come. When you lie awake worrying about an outcome you cannot control. When you feel incomplete without something external, a person, a possession, a particular set of circumstances. This is not desire. Desire is natural. You want food, shelter, connection, purpose. The Stoics did not argue against wanting things. They argued against needing them, against making your internal state dependent on their presence or absence. Attachment is desire that has calcified into dependency. It is the moment when preference becomes requirement. When you move from, I would like this, to, I cannot be okay without this. And in that shift, you surrender your freedom. The Stoics understood this with unusual clarity. They lived in a world of radical impermanence. Empires rose and fell. Fortunes were made and lost overnight. People died suddenly without warning. Relationships dissolved, power shifted, nothing was guaranteed. In that environment, attachment was a liability. The person who needed their wealth to feel secure would be destroyed when the wealth disappeared. The person who needed their reputation to feel worthy would collapse when the reputation was tarnished. The person who needed a specific outcome to feel at peace would live in constant anxiety, because outcomes are never fully within our control. Marcus Aurelius, who possessed more than almost anyone in the ancient world, practiced detachment daily. He reminded himself that everything he had, his power, his status, his health, his loved ones, was on loan, temporary, subject to change or removal at any moment. This was not pessimism. It was preparation. He was training his mind to remain stable regardless of what he had or did not have, to ground his well-being not in external conditions, but in his capacity to respond to those conditions with reason and virtue. Epictetus, who had almost nothing, practiced the same discipline from the opposite direction. He had been enslaved, physically constrained, stripped of autonomy over his own body, but he recognized that his mind remained his own. His capacity for judgment, for interpretation, for response. These could not be taken unless he surrendered them, and he did not surrender them. He maintained his mental freedom by refusing to attach his well-being to anything outside his control. This is the core Stoic insight. Freedom is not about having what you want. It is about not needing what you do not have. When you need something external to feel complete, you have made yourself a hostage. You have granted that thing power over your internal state. And because external things are inherently unstable, they change, they leap, they disappoint. You have guaranteed your own suffering. You see this everywhere once you begin to look. The person whose mood is entirely determined by how others treat them. The professional whose sense of worth rises and falls with their latest performance review. The individual who feels anxious whenever they are away from their possessions, their routines, their carefully controlled environment. These are not weak people. They are attached people. And attachment, no matter how common, no matter how normalized, is a form of imprisonment. The prison is not external. No one is forcing you to attach. The prison is internal. It is the belief that your well-being depends on things you do not fully control. And the moment you believe that, you stop being free. Because freedom, in the Stoic sense, is not about doing whatever you want. It is about wanting whatever happens. It is about maintaining your internal sovereignty regardless of external circumstances. This does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop depending. You can value something deeply without needing it to feel whole. You can love someone fully without requiring their presence to maintain your inner stability. This distinction is subtle but transformative, because when you stop attaching, you stop being controlled by outcomes, by other people, by circumstances, by the constant flux of a world that was never designed to provide you with permanent security. Seneca wrote about this extensively. He observed that people spend their lives pursuing things they believe will make them happy. Wealth, status, pleasure, recognition. And when they attain those things, they discover that happiness remains elusive, because the attainment does not bring peace. It brings new anxieties, the fear of loss, the pressure to maintain, the realization that the thing they were chasing was never going to provide what they were actually seeking. What they were seeking was internal, but they were looking for it externally. And so they remained trapped in a cycle of pursuit and disappointment. The Stoic path is different. It is the path of internal sufficiency, of building a sense of self that does not require external validation, external success, or external conditions to remain intact. This is not about becoming a hermit. It is not about rejecting the world. It is about engaging with the world from a position of strength rather than need. When you are not attached, you can participate fully without being desperate. You can pursue goals without being destroyed by failure. You can form relationships without being consumed by fear of abandonment. You can experience loss without experiencing dissolution. This is mental freedom, and it is available the moment you begin to question the attachments you have built. Attachment does not announce itself. It grows quietly, beneath awareness, disguised as care or commitment or love. You meet someone and you enjoy their company. This is natural. Then you begin to think about them when they are not there. You anticipate their messages. You feel disappointed when they do not respond as quickly as you hoped. Gradually, without noticing the shift, your emotional state becomes tied to their behavior. When they are attentive, you feel validated. When they are distant, you feel anxious. Your mood is no longer yours. It has been outsourced. This is how attachment forms. It begins as preference. You prefer this person's company. You prefer this outcome. You prefer this set of circumstances. But preference, when repeated and reinforced, becomes expectation. And expectation, when unmet, becomes suffering. The Stoics mapped this process with precision. They understood that suffering is not caused by events themselves. It is caused by the gap between what you expect and what actually occurs. When you expect nothing in particular, you cannot be disappointed. When you expect a specific outcome and reality delivers something else, you suffer. Not because reality is cruel, but because your expectation was a form of attachment. Epictetus taught this through a simple exercise. He would tell his students to practice viewing everything they valued as temporary, to imagine, before using any object, that it might break, before seeing any person, that it might be the last time. This was not meant to create anxiety. It was meant to create clarity, to train the mind to hold things lightly, to enjoy them fully in the moment without building dependency on their permanence. This is counterintuitive. Most people believe that attachment intensifies experience, that the more you need something, the more meaningful it becomes. But the opposite is true. Attachment distorts experience. It creates fear, possessiveness, and constant surveillance. You are not fully present with the thing you claim to value. You are preoccupied with the fear of losing it. Consider the person in a relationship who is constantly anxious about abandonment. They do not experience the relationship itself. They experience their fear about the relationship. Every interaction is filtered through the question: are they still interested? Are they pulling away? Am I losing them? The other person has not left, but the attachment has already created suffering. The relationship has become a source of anxiety rather than connection. Or consider the person who has worked years to build a career. They have invested their identity, their time, their energy. And now, every setback feels catastrophic. Every criticism feels like a threat, because they are not just defending their work, they are defending the part of themselves that has become fused with the work. They cannot separate who they are from what they do. And so they cannot receive feedback, cannot adapt, cannot pivot, because doing so would feel like self-destruction. This is the cost of attachment. It limits your capacity to respond flexibly. It makes you rigid, defensive, fragile, because you are no longer acting from a place of choice. You are reacting from a place of need. The Stoics distinguished between what they called preferred indifference and absolute goods. Preferred indifference are things like health, wealth, relationships, success. These are preferable to their opposites. It is better to be healthy than sick, better to be wealthy than poor, but they are not necessary for virtue, for reason, for inner freedom. Absolute goods are things like wisdom, justice, courage, self-discipline. These are internal. They are always within your control, and they are sufficient for a good life, regardless of external circumstances. When you confuse the two categories, when you treat preferred indifference as if they were absolute goods, you create dependency. You believe you need external things to be okay, and that belief guarantees suffering, because external things are never fully within your control. Marcus Aurelius practiced this distinction constantly. He would remind himself that his health was a preferred indifferent. He preferred to be healthy, but his virtue did not depend on it. His power was a preferred indifferent. He preferred to have it, but his character was not defined by it. This practice allowed him to remain stable, to do his work without being desperate, to care for his empire without being enslaved by it, to love without being possessed by fear of loss. This is the practice: to notice when preference has become dependency, to catch yourself in the moment when you begin to believe that your well-being requires a specific external condition. And to remind yourself, I prefer this, but I do not need it. I value this, but I am not defined by it. I care about this outcome, but I will remain intact regardless of whether it occurs. This is not detachment. It is accurate attachment. It is caring without clinging, valuing without demanding, engaging without depending, and it is the foundation of mental freedom. Listen to how people speak about the things they value. The language reveals the attachment: my career, my reputation, my relationship, my identity, my future. The possessive pronoun is everywhere. It suggests ownership, control, permanence. But none of these things are truly yours in the sense that you fully control them. Your career depends on markets, employers, economic conditions. Your reputation depends on others' perceptions, which you cannot manage. Your relationship depends on another person's choices, which you cannot dictate. Your identity is a construct that shifts with time and circumstance. Your future is a projection that may never materialize. You do not own any of it. You participate in it. You influence it. But you do not control it. And yet the language of possession persists, because possession implies security. If something is mine, it cannot be taken. It is stable, permanent, guaranteed. But this is an illusion, and the more you invest in the illusion, the more fragile you become. The Stoics were meticulous about language. They understood that words shape thought, and thought shapes emotion. When you speak as if you own something, you begin to believe it, and when you believe it, you begin to fear its loss. Epictetus would correct his students when they used possessive language carelessly. He would say, "That is not your child. That is a child who has been entrusted to you for a time. That is not your body. That is a body you inhabit temporarily." This was not coldness, it was precision. He was training them to see reality accurately, to recognize that everything external is on loan. That clinging to it as if it were permanent only creates suffering when the loan expires. Seneca practiced this through his writing. He would describe his wealth, his status, his relationships, but he would frame them as temporary conditions rather than possessions. He would say, "I have these things now, but I do not depend on them. I use them, but I am not defined by them. I will lose them eventually, and when I do, I will remain intact." This is the practice of linguistic detachment. To notice when your language implies ownership and to revise it. To shift from my career, to the work I currently do. To from my reputation, to how others currently perceive me. From my future, to what might happen. This is not semantic pedantry. It is cognitive restructuring. The language you use shapes the beliefs you hold, and the beliefs you hold determine your emotional responses. When you stop speaking as if you own things, you stop feeling devastated when those things change, because you never believed they were permanently yours in the first place. Consider the person who says, "I lost my job." The language implies that the job was theirs, that it was taken, that something they owned has been stolen. But the job was never theirs. It was a position they occupied, a role they performed. And now that role has ended, the external circumstance has changed, but the person remains. If they can see it this way, the loss becomes manageable. Difficult, perhaps, but not catastrophic. Because they have not lost themselves, they have lost a role, and roles are temporary by nature. But if they believe the job was theirs, if they have fused their identity with it, then losing the job feels like losing a part of themselves, and the suffering is compounded. Not just the practical difficulty of unemployment, but the existential crisis of believing that a part of them has been destroyed. The Stoics taught that this crisis is avoidable, not by never losing things, but by never believing you own them. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this in the context of death. He would remind himself that the people he loved were mortal, that they would die and that he would die, not to create morbidity, but to create clarity. When you accept impermanence in advance, you do not cling, you appreciate, you experience fully, but you do not attach your well-being to permanence because you recognize that permanence does not exist. This is the paradox. The less you possess, the more you experience. The less you cling, the more fully you engage. The less you need something to be permanent, the more deeply you can appreciate it in the present. This is not renunciation, it is liberation. The freedom to experience life without the constant fear of loss, to love without possessiveness, to value without dependency. And it begins with language, with the simple practice of noticing when you speak as if you own something and correcting yourself. Not my career, the work I do. No others perceive me, not my future, what might unfold. This shift is small, but over time, it changes everything. There is a promise that runs through modern life. The promise that if you work hard enough, plan carefully enough, accumulate enough, you will achieve security. This promise is a lie. Not because effort does not matter, it does. Not because planning is useless, it is not. But because security, in the sense that most people imagine it, a state of permanent safety, of guaranteed stability, does not exist. Everything is temporary. Everything is subject to change. And the more you organize your life around the pursuit of security, the more fragile you become, because you are chasing something that cannot be caught. And in the process, you are building attachments that will eventually create suffering. You see this in the person who accumulates wealth as a buffer against uncertainty. They work relentlessly, save aggressively, invest carefully, and the wealth grows. But so does the anxiety, because now they have something to lose, and the fear of losing it is constant. They thought wealth would bring peace. Instead, it brought vigilance, the need to monitor, to protect, to maintain. They are not free. They are guarding. Or consider the person who builds their life around a relationship. They believe that if they can just maintain the relationship, if they can keep the other person satisfied, committed, present, then they will have stability, they will be okay. But relationships are not contracts that guarantee outcomes. They are interactions between two autonomous beings, each of whom is changing constantly. The relationship may last, it may not, and the more you attach your sense of security to it, the more anxious you become, because you are trying to control something that is inherently beyond full control. The Stoics saw this pattern everywhere. People organizing their entire lives around the pursuit of external security, and in doing so, surrendering their internal security. Because internal security, the kind that actually sustains you, does not come from external conditions. It comes from knowing that you can handle whatever happens, that you have the capacity to respond, to adapt, to remain intact regardless of circumstances. This is the only security that is real, and it is the only security that is always within your control. Epictetus taught this by distinguishing between what is up to us and what is not up to us. What is up to us? Our judgments, our intentions, our responses. What is not up to us? Everything else. Your body is not fully up to you. It will age, sicken, fail. Your wealth is not fully up to you. It can be lost, stolen, devalued. Your relationships are not fully up to you. Other people have their own agency, their own reasons, their own lives. Trying to secure yourself by controlling things that are not up to you is a losing strategy. You will fail. And in failing, you will suffer. The alternative is to secure yourself internally, to cultivate the capacities that are always within your control: reason, judgment, response, virtue. These cannot be taken. They cannot be lost. They do not depend on markets, relationships, health, or any external condition. When you build your security here, you become genuinely stable. Not because nothing bad can happen to you. Bad things will happen. But because you know you can handle them, you have trained your mind to respond with clarity, with reason, with integrity. And that training does not disappear when circumstances change. Marcus Aurelius practiced this under extreme conditions. He spent years on military campaigns, dealing with plague, betrayal, political instability, the constant threat of death. He could not secure his external circumstances, so he secured his internal ones. He wrote constantly about the impermanence of everything around him, the brevity of life, the fragility of power, the inevitability of loss. Not to demoralize himself, but to remind himself that external security is a fantasy. What he could control was his response, his commitment to virtue, his capacity to act with reason regardless of what was happening around him. And that was enough. This is the Stoic reframe. Stop chasing external security. It is a mirage. Instead, build internal security, the confidence that comes not from having, but from being able to handle not having. This does not mean you stop planning. It does not mean you embrace recklessness. It means you plan without attachment to specific outcomes. You prepare without believing that preparation guarantees security. You work toward goals without depending on those goals to feel okay. Seneca wrote about this in his letters on wealth. He was wealthy himself, but he practiced living as if he were not. He would periodically adopt a life of extreme simplicity, plain food, rough clothes, minimal comfort, not as punishment, but as training. He was proving to himself that his well-being did not depend on wealth, that he could lose everything and remain intact. And in doing so, he freed himself from the fear of loss. This is the practice: to test your attachments, to temporarily remove the things you believe you need, and to observe what happens. Do you collapse? Or do you discover that you are more resilient than you believed? Most people avoid this practice because they are afraid of what they will discover. They are afraid that without their attachments they will be empty, incomplete, lost. But the opposite is usually true. When you remove the attachments, you discover that you were always whole, that the things you believed you needed were not necessary at all, that you are capable of far more than you imagined, and in that discovery you become free, not free from difficulty, free within it, free to act without desperation, free to lose without dissolving, free to live without the constant weight of trying to secure something that cannot be secured. There is a pattern that emerges in people who are deeply attached. They become controlling, not necessarily in obvious ways, not always through aggression or manipulation, but through vigilance, through the constant monitoring of the thing they are attached to, through the subtle attempts to manage, to shape, to influence in order to prevent loss. You see this in the parent who cannot let their adult child make their own decisions, who micromanages, who offers unsolicited advice, who becomes anxious whenever the child does something the parent did not approve. The parent believes this is love, but it is not love, it is attachment. The parent has made their well-being dependent on the child's choices, and because the child's choices are not within the parent's control, the parent suffers, and in an attempt to reduce that suffering, the parent tries to control, but control is an illusion. You cannot control another person. You can influence, persuade, guide, but their choices remain theirs, and the more you try to control, the more you damage the relationship, the more the other person pulls away. This dynamic plays out in every domain. In relationships where one person's attachment manifests as jealousy, possessiveness, constant need for reassurance. In careers where attachment to a specific outcome creates rigidity, inability to adapt, defensive reactions to feedback. In identity, where attachment to a particular self-image prevents growth, learning, change. The Stoics saw control as one of the primary sources of suffering, because control requires that reality conform to your preferences, and reality does not conform. It unfolds according to its own logic, its own patterns, its own timing. When you attach your well-being to controlling outcomes, you are setting yourself up for constant frustration, because outcomes are never fully within your control. Epictetus used the metaphor of a ship. You are the captain, but you do not control the wind, the sea, or the weather. You control only your response to those conditions, your steering, your decisions, your reactions. If you attach your sense of success to calm seas, you will be miserable most of the time, because seas are not always calm. But if you define success as steering well regardless of conditions, then you remain in control of the only thing that actually matters. This is the shift from trying to control circumstances to controlling your response to circumstances. This does not mean passivity. It does not mean you stop influencing the world. It means you stop believing that your well-being depends on the world responding in a particular way. You can work toward an outcome without needing it to occur. You can care about results without attaching your worth to them. You can invest effort without making your internal state dependent on success. Marcus Aurelius practiced this in his role as emperor. He could influence policy, make decisions, command armies, but he could not control the outcomes. Battles would be won or lost. Policies would succeed or fail. People would support him or betray him. If he had attached his sense of self to outcomes, he would have been destroyed, because outcomes are unpredictable. But he attached his sense of self to his intentions, to his commitment to act with virtue, with reason, with integrity, and that commitment was always within his control. This is the freedom. Not from responsibility, not from effort, but from the belief that you can or should control what happens as a result of your effort. Seneca explored this through the concept of the dichotomy of control. He would say, focus on what is yours to do. Do it as well as you can, then release it. The outcome is not yours. This is difficult for most people, because releasing the outcome feels like giving up, like you do not care. But it is the opposite. You care so much that you do the work without contaminating it with attachment. You act from clarity rather than from need, and that clarity makes the work better, not worse. When you are attached to an outcome, you become desperate, and desperation distorts judgment. You make poor decisions because you are reacting from fear rather than reasoning from principle. When you are not attached, you remain clear. You can assess situations accurately. You can adapt when circumstances change. You can fail without collapsing, because the outcome does not define you. This is the paradox. The less you need to control, the more effective you become. The less you attach to specific results, the better your results tend to be, because you are acting from a position of strength rather than need. The controlling person is not strong, they are terrified of loss, of uncertainty, of the possibility that things will not go as planned. and that terror makes them rigid, defensive, unable to respond flexibly. The Stoic is not terrified, not because they have guaranteed outcomes, but because they have trained themselves to remain stable regardless of outcomes. They have built their security internally, and that internal security allows them to engage fully without being desperate. This is the practice: to notice when you are trying to control things outside your control, to catch yourself monitoring, managing, attempting to force reality into a shape that matches your preferences, and to redirect that energy, to focus on what is actually within your control: your preparation, your effort, your response, your integrity. This is enough, and it is the only thing that is always available. There is a belief that runs deep in most people, the belief that they are incomplete, that something is missing, that if they could just attain a certain thing, a relationship, a career milestone, a possession, a level of recognition, then they would be whole. This belief is the foundation of attachment, because if you believe you are incomplete, then you will attach to whatever you think will complete you, and you will depend on it, need it, organize your life around pursuing it or maintaining it. But the belief is false. You are not incomplete. You have never been incomplete. What you're experiencing is not a lack. It is a misunderstanding. The Stoics saw this clearly. They understood that the sense of incompleteness is not a reflection of reality. It is a reflection of a mistaken relationship with desire. Desire itself is natural. You want things. You prefer certain experiences over others. This is part of being human. But when desire is coupled with the belief that you need the object of desire to be okay, it becomes attachment, and attachment creates a sense of lack. You believe, I will be happy when I achieve this. I will be at peace when I have that. I will be complete when I attain the other. But this is a trap, because the object of desire is always in the future, and the future never arrives. When you attain one thing, the sense of incompleteness simply shifts to something else. This is why people who achieve everything they once thought they wanted often find themselves no more satisfied than before. The external conditions have changed, but the internal mechanism, the belief in incompleteness, has not. Seneca wrote about this extensively. He observed wealthy people who were miserable, successful people who were anxious, admired people who were empty. They had attained what they were chasing, but the attainment did not bring fulfillment, because the problem was never external, it was internal. They believed they needed something outside themselves to feel whole, and that belief guaranteed dissatisfaction, because nothing external can fill an internal void. The Stoic response is to recognize that you are already complete, not in the sense that you have everything you want, but in the sense that your capacity for virtue, for reason, for choice is fully present, right now. Regardless of your circumstances, you do not need external validation to have worth. You do not need specific achievements to have value. You do not need a particular relationship status, career level, or possession to be whole. These things might be preferable. They might bring comfort or pleasure or opportunity, but they are not necessary for your completeness, because your completeness is not based on having, it is based on being. Epictetus taught this through the concept of self-sufficiency, not self-sufficiency in the practical sense. The Stoics were not advocating for isolation or self-reliance in all things, but self-sufficiency in the sense that your inner state does not depend on external conditions. You can engage with the world, pursue goals, form relationships, seek improvement. But none of these pursuits are driven by a sense of lack. They are driven by preference, by choice, by the desire to express your nature, not by the belief that you need them to be okay. This is a profound shift, because when you stop believing you are incomplete, you stop being desperate, you stop chasing, you stop attaching. You can still want things, but you want them from a place of sufficiency rather than need, and that changes everything. When you pursue a goal from a sense of lack, the pursuit is tainted by anxiety. You are not enjoying the process. You are enduring it in the hope that the outcome will finally bring relief. But when you pursue a goal from a sense of sufficiency, the process itself becomes meaningful. You are not waiting to arrive. You are engaging fully with where you are. And if the goal is achieved, it is a bonus, not a requirement for your well-being. Marcus Aurelius practiced this by repeatedly reminding himself of his own sufficiency. He would write, I have everything I need to respond virtuously to this moment. I do not need different circumstances. I do not need more resources. I do not need other people to behave differently. I have reason. I have choice. I have the capacity to act with integrity. That is enough. This was not arrogance. It was clarity. He was not claiming to be perfect. He was claiming claiming to be complete. Complete in the sense that he possessed everything necessary to live a good life, regardless of what happened around him. This is the practice. To notice when you feel incomplete. To catch yourself thinking, I will be okay when, I will be happy if, I will be whole once. And to question that belief. To ask, what am I lacking right now that prevents me from acting with virtue? What external condition is necessary for me to choose my response with integrity? The answer is almost always nothing. You have everything you need, not everything you want, but everything you need. And when you see that, when you truly recognize your own sufficiency, attachment begins to dissolve, because you no longer need external things to feel whole. You are already whole, and the things you pursue are no longer crutches. They are expressions, choices, preferences, but not requirements. And that distinction is the difference between bondage and freedom. There is a resistance that arises when you begin to examine your attachments. A voice that says, if I let go, I will lose everything. If I stop caring, nothing will matter. If I stop needing, I will become empty. This resistance is understandable, because attachment feels like connection, like caring, like engagement with life. But it is not. Attachment is clinging, and clinging is not the same as caring. You can care deeply without attaching. You can value something fully without needing it to remain unchanged. You can love someone completely without requiring them to stay. This is the Stoic distinction between care and attachment, between valuing and depending. Letting go does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop clinging. You stop making your internal state dependent on external conditions remaining a certain way. Epictetus taught this through a simple exercise. He would tell his students to imagine that everything they valued was borrowed, that at any moment, it could be returned to its original owner. When you see things this way, you do not take them for granted. You appreciate them fully while they are present, but you do not build your identity around them. You do not depend on them for your sense of self. This is not pessimism, it is realism. Everything is temporary. Relationships change, possessions break, circumstances shift, health declines, people die. These are not tragedies, they are facts, and the more you resist the facts, the more you suffer. Letting go is the practice of accepting reality as it is, not as you wish it to be, not as you need it to be, as it actually is. This does not mean you become passive. You can still work to change circumstances, to improve situations, to create better outcomes, but you do it without attaching your well-being to success. You act from preference, not from need, and that changes the quality of the action. When you act from need, you are desperate, and desperation creates poor judgment, rigid thinking, inability to adapt. When you act from preference, you remain clear, you can assess accurately, you can change course when circumstances shift, you can fail without collapsing. Marcus Aurelius practiced letting go constantly. He would write about the impermanence of everything around him, his power, his reputation, his relationships, his life itself. He would remind himself that none of it was guaranteed, that all of it could end at any moment, and in doing so, he trained himself to hold everything lightly, to engage fully without clinging, to care without depending. This practice is not easy, especially in a culture that equates attachment with love. That tells you that if you are not possessive, you do not care. That if you are not anxious about outcomes, you are not committed. But these are distortions. Possessiveness is not love. Anxiety is not commitment. And letting go is not abandonment. Letting go is the recognition that you do not own anything or anyone. That your role is not to control, but to respond. That your freedom lies not in having, but in being able to handle not having. Seneca practiced this through voluntary discomfort. He would periodically remove the things he was attached to. He would live simply, eat plainly, sleep roughly, not as punishment but as training. He was proving to himself that his well-being did not depend on external comfort, that he could lose it and remain intact. And in doing so he weakened the attachment. This is the practice, to temporarily remove the things you are attached to and observe what happens, to sit with the discomfort, to notice the thoughts that arise, the fears, the sense of incompleteness, and to recognize that these are just thoughts, just feelings. They are not reality. You are not actually incomplete. You are not actually at risk. You are simply confronting the attachment, and in confronting it, you begin to loosen it. Over time, this practice creates freedom. The things you once needed, you now simply prefer. The outcomes you once depended on, you now work toward without desperation. The people you once clung to, you now appreciate without possessing. This is not detachment. It is accurate attachment. It is caring without clinging. valuing without depending, engaging without being enslaved, and it is available to anyone willing to practice, not as a destination but as a process, a constant returning to the question, what am I attached to, and what would happen if I let it go? The answer is almost always surprising, because what you discover is not emptiness, it is spaciousness, not loss, but freedom. When you begin to release attachments, something unexpected happens. You become more present. Attachment pulls your attention into the future or the past. You are preoccupied with maintaining what you have or acquiring what you lack. You are worrying about loss or pursuing gain. You are rehearsing conversations that have not happened or replaying ones that have. But you are not here. Not fully, not in this moment, because the moment does not contain the thing you are attached to in the form you need it. The Stoics understood that presence is the foundation of freedom, because the present moment is the only place where you have power. The past is gone, the future has not arrived, all you have is now, and all you can control is your response to now. When you are attached, you are not responding to now, you are reacting to projections, to memories, to fears about the future, to narratives about what should be happening, instead of what is actually happening. This is why attachment creates suffering, because you are living in a reality that does not exist, and the gap between that imagined reality and actual reality is where the pain lies. Marcus Aurelius practiced presence by repeatedly bringing his attention back to the present. He would remind himself this moment is all you have, not the past, which is gone, not the future, which may never arrive, this moment, right now. What is required of you in this moment? What is within your control? What response aligns with virtue? These questions anchor you in reality. They pull you out of projection and into presence, and presence is where freedom lies. Because in the present moment, you are not lacking anything. You have everything necessary to respond with integrity. You are not waiting for circumstances to change. You are not dependent on outcomes you do not control. You are simply here, and here is enough. Epictetus taught this through the practice of attention. He would tell his students to notice where their mind goes, when it drifts into worry about the future or regret about the past, to bring it back, not forcefully, gently, like guiding a wandering animal back to the path. This is not suppression, it is redirection. You are training the mind to remain with what is, rather than drifting into what might be or what was. This training is the foundation of mental freedom, because when you are present, attachments lose their grip. You are not projecting need into the future. You are not carrying the weight of past loss. You are simply here, observing, responding, choosing. Seneca wrote about this in his Letters on Time. He observed that most people do not live their lives, they spend their lives. They are always elsewhere, planning, regretting, worrying, pursuing, and in doing so, they miss the only life that is actually available to them. The life happening right now. The person attached to wealth is not enjoying the wealth they have. They are worrying about losing it, or planning how to increase it. The person attached to a relationship is not experiencing the relationship as it is. They are anxious about how it might change. The attachment prevents presence. And without presence, life becomes a series of abstractions. You are not living, you are managing, monitoring, protecting. But when you release the attachment, you return to presence, and in presence you discover something profound. Life is not elsewhere, it is here, not in the achievement of some future goal, not in the preservation of some current condition. Here now, in this breath, this moment, this choice. This is not a mystical claim, it is a practical observation. All you ever have is the present moment. And the present moment is always sufficient, not because it contains everything you want, but because it contains everything you need to respond with virtue. You do not need different circumstances to act with integrity. You do not need more resources to choose wisely. You do not need other people to behave differently for you to remain clear. You have what you need, right here, right now. And when you see that, when you truly recognize the sufficiency of the present moment, attachment loses its power, because attachment is based on the belief that this moment is not enough, that you need something else, something more, something different. But that belief is false. This moment is enough, not because it is perfect, not because it contains no difficulty, but because it contains everything necessary for you to respond with reason, with choice, with integrity. And that response is all that is ever required of you. Not to control outcomes, not to secure conditions, but to respond well to what is. This is the return to presence, and it is the return to freedom. Because freedom is not about having what you want, it is about being fully where you are, without needing it to be different, without clinging to how it was, without projecting into how it might be. Just here, just now, just this, and this is always enough. There is a Stoic concept that is often misunderstood, the concept of indifference. In modern language, indifference suggests apathy, a lack of care, a cold detachment from life. But that is not what the Stoics meant. Stoic indifference is not about caring less. It is about caring accurately. It is about distinguishing between what truly matters and what does not. What truly matters, according to the Stoics, is your capacity for virtue, your ability to act with wisdom, justice, courage, and self-discipline, your choices, your responses, your integrity. Everything else is indifferent, not unimportant, not worthless, but not necessary for a good life. Health is preferable to sickness, but it is indifferent in the sense that your virtue does not depend on it. You can act with integrity whether you are healthy or sick. Wealth is preferable to poverty, but it is indifferent. You can live virtuously whether you are wealthy or poor. Reputation is preferable to disgrace, but it is indifferent. Your character is not determined by how others perceive you. This distinction liberates, because it tells you where to invest your attention and where to release it. You invest in what is within your control, your judgments, your choices, your responses. You release what is outside your control, outcomes, other people's opinions, circumstances. This is not resignation. It is strategic allocation of energy. You focus on what you can actually influence, your own mind, and you stop wasting energy on what you cannot influence, everything else. Marcus Aurelius practiced this distinction constantly. He was emperor, but he understood that his power was an indifferent. It was preferable to have it, because it allowed him to do good on a large scale, but it was not necessary for his virtue. His character would remain intact whether he ruled an empire or lived in obscurity. This understanding freed him. He could perform his duties without being enslaved by them. He could lose power without losing himself, because his sense of self was not tied to the role. It was tied to his capacity for virtue, and that capacity was always within his control. Epictetus taught this through the practice of premeditation. He would have his students imagine losing everything they valued, not to create fear, but to create perspective. When you imagine loss in advance, you recognize that what you fear losing is an indifferent. It is preferable to keep it, but it is not necessary for your well-being. And when you recognize that, you stop clinging. You stop making your internal state dependent on something external. You become free. This is the liberation of indifference. Not the absence of preference, but the absence of dependency. You can prefer health, wealth, success, connection, but you do not depend on them. You do not collapse when they are absent. You do not become desperate in pursuing them. You engage with life from a position of sufficiency rather than need, and that sufficiency allows you to act more effectively, not less. When you are not desperate, you make better decisions. When you are not attached, you adapt more easily. When you are not dependent on specific outcomes, you can commit fully to the process without being paralyzed by fear of failure. This is the paradox. Indifference, in the Stoic sense, does not make you less engaged. It makes you more engaged, because you are no longer held back by fear, by attachment, by the need to control what you cannot control. You are free to act, free to fail, free to try again, free to lose, free to begin again, because your well-being does not depend on any of it. It depends only on your response, and your response is always within your control. Seneca explored this through his writings on loss. He wrote about losing wealth, losing status, losing loved ones, and in each case, his response was the same. This is an indifferent. It is painful, perhaps. It is difficult, but it is not a loss of what matters most. What matters most, his capacity for virtue, his integrity, his reason, remained intact. And as long as that remained, he remained. Everything else was circumstance, preferable in some cases, but not necessary. This is the practice. To identify your attachments and to recognize them as indifference. To see that you have been treating preferences as necessities, and to release that treatment, not by forcing yourself not to care, but by understanding accurately what you are caring about, by distinguishing between what is truly necessary for a good life and what is simply preferable. When you do this, attachment loses its grip, because attachment is based on the belief that certain external things are necessary, but they are not. They are preferable, and preferences, by definition, can be unmet without destroying you. This is the liberation, the freedom to prefer without depending, to care without clinging, to engage without being enslaved, and it is available to anyone willing willing to practice the discipline of indifference. There is a place you can return to at any moment. It is not a physical place. It is a perspective, a way of seeing, a recognition of what is truly yours. The Stoics called it the inner citadel, the fortress of the mind, the part of you that cannot be touched by external circumstances, that remains stable regardless of what happens around you or to you. This is not a retreat. It is a foundation. It is the ground you stand on when everything else is shifting, and it is always available. Not because you have achieved some special state, not because you have attained enlightenment, but because it is your nature. It is what you are when you strip away the attachments, the identities, the stories. You are the capacity to observe, to reason, to choose, and that capacity is sovereign. It does not depend on circumstances. It does not require permission. It cannot be taken. Marcus Aurelius returned to this place constantly. In the midst of war, political chaos, personal loss, he would write, "Retreat into yourself." The rational mind is sufficient for itself when it acts justly and thereby secures tranquility. This was not escapism. It was recalibration. He was reminding himself that his power was internal, that while he could not control the empire, the war, or the people around him, he could control his response, and his response was where his freedom lived. Epictetus taught this to his students by emphasizing the distinction between what belongs to them and what does not. Your body does not fully belong to you. It can be constrained, harmed, aged, destroyed. Your possessions do not belong to you. They can be taken. Your reputation does not belong to you. It is shaped by others. What belongs to you is your mind, your capacity for judgment, your inner dialogue, your choice of response. This is your sovereignty, and it is absolute, not in the sense that you can control everything, but in the sense that you can always control this, your perspective, your interpretation, your choice. And that control is sufficient for freedom. Because freedom, in the Stoic sense, is not about external conditions. It is about internal state. It is the capacity to remain clear, stable, and virtuous regardless of what is happening around you. This is why attachment limits mental freedom, because attachment ties your internal state to external conditions, and external conditions are unstable. They change, they disappoint, they end. But when you release attachment, when you return to your sovereignty, you are no longer dependent on external conditions. You are grounded in what is always available, your capacity to observe, to reason, to choose. This is the sovereign mind, and it is not something you achieve. It is something you recognize, something you return to, again and again. Each time you notice yourself clinging to outcomes, depending on others, needing circumstances to be different, you return to the question, what is within my control? And the answer is always the same: your attention, your interpretation, your response. This is enough. It has always been enough, and it will always be enough, not because external things do not matter. They do, but because your freedom does not depend on them. Your freedom depends only on your recognition of your own sovereignty. Seneca wrote about this in his final years. As his political situation deteriorated, as he faced exile and eventually execution, he returned to this principle. He wrote, "No one can take my peace unless I give it to them. No one can destroy my virtue unless I abandon it. My mind is mine, and as long as it remains mine, I remain free." This was not bravado. It was precision. He was describing the only freedom that is real, the only freedom that cannot be revoked. And that freedom is available to you, not someday, not when circumstances improve. Now, in this moment, in the simple act of recognizing what is yours. Your mind is yours, your capacity for reason is yours, your choice of response is yours. And these are sufficient, not for controlling the world, but for remaining free within it. This is the return to sovereignty, to the recognition that while you cannot control what happens, you can always control what you make of what happens. And that control is not a burden. It is a gift. It is the only real power you have ever had. And it is the only power you will ever need. If this made you reconsider what you're holding on to, think like a Stoic.